All right, gang. If you listen to our show at all, you can tell, or you should have been able to tell, that in the retrospective Universal Monsters, a lot of people on our team and a lot of people who listen to our show when we talk to you guys live, you all have an affinity for werewolves, stemming all the way back from the classic Wolfman to everything I was just talking to our guest about, like classics, cult classics like American Werewolf in London. I am happy to say there is a new super rad werewolf movie for you guys to check out called Blackout. And it is a different tonality of a werewolf movie than what we're used to in 2024 in the most refreshing way, I gotta say. And to talk all about it with me is the cinematographer from that film, Mr. Collin Brazie. How are you doing, man?
Hey, thanks so much. I appreciate it. I'm doing well. How are you doing?
Good, man. So this film is like everything it does in this movie. It seems like it is leaving these little like love note Easter eggs to other werewolf films, from Charlie's costume design on like when you're framing him like slurking, he's very like he looks kind of like the universal classic Wolfman, the
Mhm.
pants, the long shirt, and he's got like that hunched over haunch to him, to the transformation scenes. The one that you guys did in the car was freaking awesome. um, you know, you really framed up, and the makeup team and everything, like it really was awesome sequence for when everything's just stemming right. And that, was, I got American Werewolf in London fix on seeing him transform. Like, this looks awesome. And then just the straight up, like, unquestionable gore factor that this thing still has. Like, is it going to be like a slower paced, old school werewolf movie? No, man. You guys throw in the modern gore and the like the kills and everything else. Like, this thing for you as the cinematographer, DP, like, had to have been a lot of fun because, like I said, you're doing this werewolf movie with all these like different kinds of werewolf movies all blended into gel to make like a dope werewolf movie on your own right.
Right. No, yeah, thanks. Yeah, I appreciate it. I'm glad you liked it, and glad you appreciate some of those references and some of the stuff that we were kind of queuing up in the film. When Larry was writing the film and he had sent the script over to me, one of the big things we talked about very early on was, the look of the werewolf and how we want to, photograph the werewolf. Obviously, it's very important in a creature feature like this one. And the Universal movies are an important reference to us and a very important thing to Larry. That was something that he grew up watching and loving, and still loves to this day. And so, the 1941, the Wolf Man, was definitely a big inspiration for the way that the werewolf was designed, and the makeup and special effects team led by Brian Spears. That he very much wanted to feel more Wolf Man and less werewolf in the sense of, some of those 80s films with the bigger snout, and they're a little bit more like dog and, wolf like, and he very much wanted to be that like Wolfman creature. And I think that kind of lends itself to the idea of this, half man half beast kind of thing, and the sort of psychological tear that kind of takes over with the monster, and
Sure.
how it kind of is the duality of man, and how that takes over our lead character played by Alex Hurt. And yeah, you mentioned kind of his physicality that he brought to the role, and his hunchiness and things like that. And though, during some of the attack scenes and things of that nature, that was definitely something that, I know they worked on a lot, and something that we talked about a lot too, as far as like the way we would approach photographing him, and the way we would approach some of the more physical scenes in the film.
Was there anything in particular? I mean, you mentioned again the 41 Wolfman, but with that, because there are scenes with him in the woods that, I mean, you're tracking him so similarly to the 41 film.
Hmm.
And then there are scenes which is the complete, polar opposite of that vibe.
Mhm.
Were there certain like werewolf movies for you in particular, um, aside from the 41 Wolfman film?
The 41 Wolfman was really the big one as far as like bigger werewolf inspiration as far as like horror films and stuff of that nature. I'm trying to remember if we actually watched or kind of referenced any other, 70s or 80s. I mean, probably a little bit of like a werewolf in London. But honestly, as far as like more visual and tonal references, I mean, this film is such a, it's such a big character piece. There's so many characters within it, and the script, I know it was important to Larry, and something that I also loved about the script is that it did lend itself to some of those tropes from like the earlier Universal horror films, right? Because you have like the angry townspeople, you have like the mobs, you have the preacher, who's trying to, have this morality tale within it, you have this
Love
this
interest.
fading love interest, you know what I mean? So like there were tropes in the, throughout the script that really lended itself to some of those like more universal, films, some of those universal monster movies. And so that's something that I loved about it. And something that I really attached to the first time I read the script was just all these people that and all these characters that are really, fleshed out throughout it, and that was exciting to me, knowing that it wasn't just going to be like, oh, your traditional or stereotypical, okay, there's going to be like guys going to turn to werewolf, there's going to be a lot of carnage, blah blah blah, and so a lot of the references that we had were more, it was stuff like Chinatown. It was stuff like Fargo. It was a little bit more, oh, hey, let's lean into this naturalistic approach to this more, realistic and natural approach to how do you want to photograph these townspeople? How do you want to photograph these people? Because, even for a horror film and it's a, werewolf film, like a lot of it takes place during the day. There's a fair amount of night scenes, obviously, and those had their own, complications and excitement as well. But a lot of it, takes place during the day, which is pretty cool. And I think that with a lot of horror films, if you can juxtapose the amount of night work with day scenes like that, it does make the night stuff feel even darker and more scary. I think when you have something that's like directly contrasting it, and so having all these scenes throughout all these characters, whether it's the police officers, or the love interest or the best friend Earl. I think all of these things kind of bring it all together to make it this cohesive like story about like, I don't know, a town, and how this guy is dealing with the fact that he is transitioning into a werewolf at night. Mhm.
Yeah, the point that you just brought up right there as a cinematographer, how was that for you? Because you really are the Fargo aspect is a great call because that is a great way to describe how these people interact with each other. If you watch the series on FX and compare it to the dynamic of the townspeople of Blackout, that is spot on. So how was it where you're filming that and then you guys are turning around and I mean you are doing some of the like raddest horror, gory werewolf kills and designs and everything on the other end of that. Like, how is that as a cinematographer to photograph to photograph both of those
Mhm.
on the same project?
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's an interesting challenge, being able to, have so many different types of scenes. Right. And one of the more interesting challenges of Blackout was the fact that one, there were so many characters, and two, there were so many locations. Right. And then on top of that, you have a lot of daytime, you have a lot of nighttime. Right. And you also want to always have this kind of feel of the ticking clock. Right. You have a werewolf when when the moon comes up, you know, stuff's going to go down, right? And that's something that the audience and the characters always know in the back of their minds. So that's something that like you always had to keep in the back of my mind as cinematographer is like, okay, what time of day is this? How present, like how present do we want that, setting sun to feel? How much do we and so it was an interesting challenge because you always do want to have that like kind of ticking clock, ticking bomb that's about to go off. as far as like how it was photographing the daytime and the night stuff, I mean, we had to move quickly. We were a pretty modestly budget film. It's an indie film through and through, and we just had to make sure that we were able to um, spend time and choose which scenes that we wanted to spend a lot of time on and which scenes that we knew we were going to have to shoot a little bit like more quickly.
Hmm.
It's always important in indie film to try to be as prepared as possible. I feel like because the more conversations that you can have ahead of time, then the less kind of stuff that you're sort of trying to decide on the day. And I think it also opens you up to be able to have fresh thoughts that happen on the day. And if you have a plan and you're ready to execute, that when you do veer away from that plan, the more prepared you are, I think, the better off you'll be if you get into a scenario where you feel like you need to, kind of steer away from that plan.
Hmm.
Sorry, was that answering your question? I'm trying
For sure. It's
to,
just
I could talk a little bit more about the daytime versus nighttime stuff too. The the scene because the film, because it doesn't have a lot of daytime and night exteriors. The night exteriors obviously take a little bit more time to set up and execute, and that's something that we knew ahead of time how many of those that we're going to have, and so we knew we were able to let's put a little bit more resources, a little bit more time towards some of those. One of the big things that Larry and I discussed early on for the night stuff is that, and this is quite ironic with it being a werewolf film, is that neither of us really love like deep blue moonlight or anything like that. You have a lot of that sort of 80s and early 90s hard blue backlight, and I think both of us are pretty adverse to that. So we did take a much more like Fargo-esque approach to some of the lighting of the night scenes, just in that we wanted a lot of practicals to be motivating the lighting in those scenes. We didn't want just like hard blue light everywhere. So really the only time that we used moonlight as a light source was if it was really the only practical source that would be going on. For
yeah,
instance, in the opening of the film where there's two lovers in a field, and they're going to get it from the POV of the werewolf there, right? Like that was a scenario where that was the only, the moon would be the only realistic light source in that scene.
sure.
Nothing else going on. So that was a situation where it was like, all right, we need to decide how blue we wanted it to go, how silvery and like silverish we wanted it to feel. And so that was a big concept and a big thing that we tested and tried early on to make sure that we were getting right. If you notice, there's another scene where you mentioned the transformation scene. A lot of that's all lit practically as though he was driving the car.
Yeah.
Once the car is flipped, and this is a spoiler, sorry for everybody, but once the car is flipped a little bit, it is a very naturalistic approach to it. It's very much taking keys from and influences from Roger Deakins and Fargo, from when there is that car chase in that film where everything's motivated by headlights and rear lights, and there's no harsh like blue backlight ever. So it's pretty interesting, and I felt like it was an interesting approach to a werewolf film in particular, just because you have this idea of this big full moon, and how do you photograph it but also keep it feeling a little bit more like realistic.
The thing that you nail on that too is the fact that you guys use all the natural light sources, whether they be natural or not, that are
Mhm.
in the given situation. And that is one of the things that I thought was awesome about him transforming as he's driving, is
Mhm.
you guys, the way that you guys put all that together, you're framing his direction, yeah, his and the acting, of course, but it was like it felt very real. Like this is how a dude, like if I was driving, like we have a highway, 2-lane highway that goes through our town that connects to the major interstate. That's always like the alternative route if you don't want to deal with traffic on the main freeway.
Mhm.
And I was like, shit, man, like if I was driving on 132 and I happen to be turning into a werewolf, this is exactly how it would look like. So, like, that as a cinematographer, like, was it that sequence in general, or what sequences for you when you watch this thing now that it's done and it's out? Are you like, yeah, man, like that we killed
Yeah, I like that really worked out. Yeah, it's that transformation scene. Larry, I think, had initially had the idea of, oh, how crazy would it be if a man was transitioned to werewolf like while driving a car, or was in some scenario where you're trapped, but you're also trying to like keep hold it together and function till you get someplace.
it.
And it was taken from a podcast that he co-hosts, or a podcast of stories that he writes and co-writes and co-hosts. And so that was honestly a big jumping off point, was like, this is a really interesting scenario. Like, what happens when a guy is dealing with this sort of, situation, this dire situation. Um, and so that was something that we talked about a lot in pre-production, want to make sure we got right. As far as like something that when I watch now and I feel like, oh man, I'm really happy with the way that turned out. Honestly, I do like the transformation scene a lot. I mean, there is a nice naturalism to it. We go a little handheld, a little grittier in that scene. Obviously, there's a lot of it's very chaotic with what's going on with the main character, and we wanted the audience to feel that. And I'm quite happy with the way that the scene that takes place right after it, where you have the Good Samaritans who are coming off the road to try to help somebody, and obviously maybe they should have thought twice about that. Maybe that's a lesson from the film too. But yeah, no, I'm quite happy the way that scene turned out as well. Again, a night exterior where we don't have a whole lot of moonlight, and we're just sort of taking the cues from the way the car landed, and the approach that the Good Samaritans have with their headlights. And so I'm quite happy the way that scene turned out as well. There's a few scenes as well with the two police officers, who were two of my favorite characters when I read the script, and I love the way that a lot of their scenes, and I don't know if it was just the way it was written on the page or what we spoke about, with what that Larry and I spoke about in pre-production about their relationship, but there was something about like having them in frame a lot together, and something about wanting to connect them a lot. And so I think we did our best to sort of like shoot a lot of their stuff in real simple pieces of shots, and not use a lot of coverage. Actually, we shot them a lot in two shots, and shot them a lot in oneers, and scenes where I feel like you really feel them together in a space. And I think that sort of subconsciously is washing over the viewer in a way that allows them to sort of connect a little bit more to those characters, and makes you feel for them as the story's going along. And then obviously without spoiling what happens to either of them, but I think it allows you to connect more with the characters, and so I hope audience members feel that.
No, I think they will. I think they will really with every character that Charlie kind of connects with along his way, like the emotion of his best friend,
Hmm.
uh, the scene that you do, halfway, maybe a little bit more halfway through, that you guys do just like in the kitchen living room area, and it's just solely the two of them talking about the weight of the situation, like,
Hmm.
or the there's a few different scenes, like you said, with the waning love interest, where they you could tell there's love there. There
Hmm.
is love there without getting too
Hmm.
spoilery. Like, if you didn't know for the first hour and a half, like, you will know by the end that there is love there, and
Yeah. Hmm.
there all of that, like, it rings true. Like, the thing that I think gets lost from the old Universal movies to now, that you guys do a great job of bringing back, is that it wasn't just as simple as like a maniac is on the loose, or a werewolf is on the loose, or a doctor is reanimating corpses. Like,
Right.
like when you go back and watch those movies, like, the gravity of the situation, like, Dr. Frankenstein is reanimating corpses, like he's grave robbing and like, now it's all go 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 go. God
Hmm.
knows I teach high school, like all those kids do is they want to go 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 go. And
Hmm.
so if you're going to remake Frankenstein beat for beat, like, we'd spend probably what 10, 15 minutes on the fact that he's robbing graves and trying to reanimate these corpses. And that's where you guys have really like paced this thing out. And the fact that it is an indie movie, because that's one of the cruxes of indie film is the budget. And like you
Mhm.
said, like you have the time on your mind, on Colin's mind, of like, okay, we got to get this done because we're working with this indie budget. But
Mhm.
from the script to the execution on this thing, like never did I feel like you guys were rushed. Did this thing like did this thing like feel like, oh man, like he must have like known in his mind like we're hitting like 90 pages, so I got to cram like all this stuff into 10 pages. Like none of that ever came across. How was it with you guys like actually filming the thing,
Mhm.
knowing that you are up against like the limitations, like because it all looks smooth as hell on the final project. Like how did would you say stuff was running behind the scenes?
Oh. Well, thanks. I appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, we had a great producing team. They were excellent. Each day making sure that we had what we needed and we were moving quickly. Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned before, it's like we had a lot of locations and a lot of speaking parts, so there was a lot of days, especially in the first like front half of the shoot when we were doing a lot of the daytime stuff, where we would have 2 or 3 location moves a day. So a lot of times, again, I talk about being prepared because a lot of times you're going in this location. I was probably there once before with Larry, location scouting some of these places, and we'd come up with the plan, we talked about it, and then yeah, you're kind of getting there, and you're sort of just needing to execute, right? Because you're getting there, the casting crew, all the gear, you're gutting the trucks, you're getting out, you're shooting the scene, boom, packing it up, you got to move, because you got to do that 2 more times that day. So I mean, I think again, it's just kind of being about being prepared, and having and knowing, okay, like what can we get away with here? How can I use natural light to my benefit? How can, what sort of approach works for the scene, is getting across the story that we need to, but also is going to allow us to, move quickly because we've got to do this, at a couple more times today. There were a few more scenes, in the second and third weeks where we might be in a location for a full day or 2 days. It didn't happen a lot, but there's a couple of those, and those is where you can do a little bit more methodical light planning. You can do a little bit more, methodical camera moves, things of that nature, because okay, we're going to be here. We can get set up. We're going to have a little bit more time with these scenes, and in either those scenes are a little bit longer, or perhaps they're just, a little bit more of the meat of the story. And you're like, okay, we need to actually spend a little bit more time with these. But some of those earlier stuff, and there's a lot of driving scenes in the film, right? There's a decent amount of car stuff and driving stuff as well. And, you know, those scenes are very important, and you need to make sure that they're photographed and look well, but they're also okay, like we know, all right, we're driving from here to here, but we only have so much time to reset. Maybe we'll just run the scene a couple times in a row before we reset. There's things like that that you can do to sort of allow yourself a little bit more time on the back end of the day, so that you're not like constantly like resetting things of that nature.
What for you is the biggest challenge as a cinematographer to shoot in instances like this? Is it the driving stuff, like trying to figure out like how to rig up the car to get all the footage that you know you want?
Mhm. I'd say the biggest challenge. I mean, honestly, I feel like this is probably a not a super original answer, but it's always time. You're always going up against time. That's always the biggest obstacle. You've got to, there's only going to be so many days. Like I said, you're only going to have so much time at a certain location, and you might not have time to go back there again later in the schedule. Especially on a movie like this with so many locations. It's all right. We got to shoot out everything at this location because we're only going to be here this one day, and we're not coming back. We don't really have time to come back to this. So it's really just making sure you're getting all the pieces you need, and making sure that it looks as great as you possibly can. I mean, another obstacle of the film. This is pretty interesting one too. Is like, so there's a couple scenes that takes place at Earl's house, right, and that's his best friend. And so we shot all those scenes there. it was, and sorry, let me go back. So there's a couple scenes that we shot at Earl's place, and all of those scenes, they take place in the afternoon, sort of as the sun is beginning to go down, right? And it's
Mhm.
beginning, it's as the sun's starting to set before the moon's going to come up. So we knew that we wanted to have these, nice shafts of light. We knew we wanted to be like a little bit more gold and a little bit more orange. We wanted there to be like warmth to these scenes. Well, the 2.5 days that we had at the location, it was raining nonstop that entire time. So we had very little natural light. We had very little, yeah. So we had very little natural light, and essentially, like all of that was stuff that you had to create. Now, obviously, in pre-production, you're hoping, okay, well, I'll be able to, light through these windows. We'll be able to like bring in some fill here, but you're not anticipating it raining the entire time, right? Because then now you're like, okay, are we needing to tent these lights? Are we needing like how much can we get away with? We need to throw stuff through like every single window instead of maybe, okay, well, maybe that window in the background of the scene, maybe we could have just had like natural light coming through that and it would have been enough. But now, okay, now we need to put something out there because it looks way too dark back there. Like it doesn't look like it's, sunset hour. It looks like it's, it looks like it's raining outside. You know what I mean? So,
Right.
there's obstacles like that you always run into, and you've got to be able to just, kind of adapt to them and be quick on your feet. That's sort of, what you always have to do as a DP, and what you always have to do as an indie filmmaker too, is kind of like be able to read the situations, adapt to them, so that you're not like slowing down. And again, you're always up against that ticking clock. I guess we're like werewolves that way.
As a just film fan in general, did
Mhm.
you always want to do um, horror movies when you knew you would get to cinematography, DP as your career, or did you want other genres, or
Mhm.
both? Like, where
Yeah.
are you at on the horror fan level?
Sure. Yeah, yeah. No, I mean, I love shooting all kinds of different projects. I love shooting horror stuff. I love shooting genre stuff. I love shooting, dramas. I'm not real picky as long as the story is good. I think that's what you're always hunting for, is like a really good story. It's funny, growing up, I liked horror films a lot, and I always liked this idea of, something that would like really scare you, down to the bone. And, so you hear about things, you're like, oh, The Exorcist, like everyone says that's the scariest movie. Okay, I got to check that out to see if I can like handle it, and you kind of grow up doing a little bit of that. But I would say honestly, when I really got into like horror films was probably like in college. I took a class about on horror films when I was in undergrad, and that really allowed me to appreciate them on a even more on a psychological and thematical level that I think I probably that you don't pick up when you're probably watching them as a teenager.
For
Like
sure.
that. So I think ever since then I've been a huge fan of the genre, and I've as my career has gone on, I never shy away from it. I like working on them. I like shooting them. And I like watching them. Mhm.
Do you have a favorite, subgenre of horror, or whether it be like the classic monsters, Wolfman, Frankenstein, or 80s, Freddy, Jason, the slashers, or now modern age? It seems more and more like we're into paranormal stuff again a lot. We're
Mhm.
seeing a lot of like ghosts and haunting type stuff. Do you have one that kind of rings your bell, so to speak, that you enjoy more than others?
Um, I guess if I was going to pinpoint down to like a subgenre, I mean, I don't know, is like psychological horror, is that a thing? I
Yeah,
think anything that really has to do more with, I think horror films that revolve around something that I think could actually happen in real life
for
scare me
sure.
scare me
Yeah,
more than like something that might have like a monster or like a Freddy or Jason, like a slasher film in
for
that
sure.
yeah, I think things um, that have to do with like serial killers or someone I always think back to on the DVD of like Silence of the Lambs. I remember watching some special features where they had like diary entries from some of these serial killers that were like in jail at the time, and like they would like and they had them as like you could like like read them, or they would do like a voiceover of them if you as you were reading them, and they were so disturbing and so haunting that like it just made that film even more scary to me. I know it's a big like, oh, is Silence of the Lambs a horror movie? Yeah, it's like a big, sort of a
Oh,
touchy subject. But I think it is. I mean, I think it is.
Silence of the Lambs is definitely a horror movie.
Yeah,
Like,
I think so. I mean, you got people wearing other people's faces in it. That's not horrific. I don't know what is. Uh,
yeah,
but yeah, so I think stuff like that where it's based a little bit more in reality and it's something that could happen or you could see happen, whether it's someone showing up at your doorstep, something like that, or something that again demented people sort of come across in real life. So yeah, so I think stuff like that is what frightens me more anyway as a viewer and stuff that I enjoy watching.
there's the avenue of film or horror in general. There's so many different turns that you can go down as a
Mhm.
fan, or if you are wanting to get into it professionally. I know when I went to film school, they made us spend a couple months in every department to kind of have an appreciation for what goes into it. And I always like answering, or I always like asking this question of our podcast guests, because I was so grateful having gone to school down south that I had done it, because the knowledge that I had after the fact so greatly outweighs what I had going in. There are plenty of guests on here that have gone further than I ever will in the film industry genre, interviewing, even stuff, you know, entertainment, however, whatever avenue you want to look at, who didn't go to school at all and would tell you that they didn't need to, and if they were giving their advice, they would say you don't either. Just pick up and learn and follow from where things happen. For you, in your experiences, where would you say, if someone is listening or watching and they're like, man, like now is the time, 2024, I'm going to do it. I'm going to either make a movie or find an avenue to be part of one. Like, where do you suggest people who are like really trying to like get into it, to make some money, even try to build a career? How would you call and say like the first steps in going that direction would be?
Gotcha. Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, as far as like first steps, I would say, yeah, I mean, my first steps were I was making, videos with friends in high school. It was I, would always there was an option to sort of make some sort of hands-on project or some sort of video versus writing a paper. I was always veering toward that. I would always rather like do some sort of presentation or if there was some sort of video aspect or photographic aspect to it, I always was doing that. So I mean, I think step one is just yeah, picking up a camera and seeing if you enjoy doing it. If you like doing it, you like the process, you like working it with the footage and post and stuff, then continue on. As far as the no school versus just going out making a project, I mean, it's tough to say which one's better over the other. I think you learn a lot from hands-on opportunities, right? Like you learn a lot more being on set than you could in a classroom. I think that's true. And that's, as I'm sure that's a trope that a lot of people will tell you. I got personally a lot out of my film school experience. So I think I am a proponent of it just because you meet so many people and you're working with a lot of like-minded individuals and people who are extremely passionate about the same things you are. And when you find yourself in a scenario where you're with other extremely passionate people, you end up making great things together. So maybe, I mean, I grew up in Dayton, Ohio. There wasn't a whole lot of filmmaking people, or at least in my circle. So I don't know if I would have been able to do that or find those people. I mean, today it probably is a lot easier to do that with social media and things like that, which weren't around when I was in high school. But yeah, I mean, I got a lot out of it, and I think with film school, I think a lot of it does boil down to like you get out of it what you put into it, and if you are really passionate, you're really dedicated toward it, I think you'll get a lot out of it. Um, but that being said, it's like you definitely learn the most being on set, and you learn the most from like trying things with your friends or your classmates. So it's a tough scenario, but I think if something that you truly are wanting to do and kind of like dedicate your life to, then you got to go out and try it. Whether either way, whether it's go out and take a summer course, or go out and take one or two classes and see if you like it. I mean, I know that was something that I did. Again, my own personal experience of, I started as one major in college, and then, was like, I'm not sure this is what I want to be doing full time. I want to try some other stuff. And so then I started dipping my toes into film classes. And that's
Hmm.
how I was like, okay, this is all right. This is something I love and I'm passionate about. Again, growing up in Ohio, the idea of making films and television for a living, it's like it's not like all around you. I didn't grow up in like New York or LA or anything like that. So,
Right.
the idea of having a career based around one of those things seems like, that's not a realistic option for me. I don't know anybody that does that. But after being in school, I started taking some courses, and it was like, oh, this is like, I love this. This is like, I've never wanted to go to a class more in my life. And then you discover your passions and things that you want to be doing, and it kind of grows from there.
So what was it that got you to that next level? Like you're talking, because it seems like more and more now you're seeing more and more indie, especially in the horror genre, more indie films that are coming outside of like the LA area. The feeling of you don't necessarily have to be in Los Angeles to get your stuff out
Hmm.
is is pretty prominent right now on the indie horror scene, or really
Hmm.
on the film scene in general, I think.
Hmm.
Uh, and not so much just to be able to self promote or self produce, but to get like real eyes on it, to like
Hmm.
really get an opportunity to get someone to come on board and really get the exposure you're looking for. Back then, when you're talking about like living there and there's no real avenue until you found those college classes, like did you stay there long, or did you end up leaving? And like where was your your career trajectory like once you realized film was it?
Hmm. Yeah, once I realized film was it, I finished undergrad, and then I went to grad school. So then I went to Chapman University and did my MFA there in cinematography, and that was something that I chose to do because I didn't feel like when I was leaving undergrad, even though I'd taken a handful of production courses and a handful of theory and film criticism courses, that I didn't feel confident that I'd be able to just like go out and start making features, or go out and start making like really professional looking short films. I felt like I wanted to, get a little bit more experience from what like an MFA program would be able to offer me, and then from there you're going in, and then you're starting to make films that are much more professional looking. And one of the things that really brought me to cinematography was that the early shorts and stuff that I made in high school and in college and things like that were, the cinematography and the lighting was so amateurish. You know what I mean? That was one of those things where I was like, oh, if there's something that I really could improve on craft wise, it was definitely the lighting, and exposure, and truly understanding those principles of exposure, and how to, like at the time it was shooting 16 millimeter. So the idea of how to properly expose 16, and how to properly um, light for film was a big thing. And so it was, I felt like I was really learning a craft and kind of honing a craft at the time. Um, and so that was one of the reasons why I felt like going to an MFA program was like right for me. I did have some, advisors and people, faculty that I knew at the time that were like, oh, well, if you're going to, go into that, why not just try to go out and make a feature instead of, oh, sorry about that, why not try to go out and make a feature instead of going to like film school. And I didn't think that it would have been a giant waste of money if I'd gone out and tried to make a feature at that time. You know what I mean? Like it would have, I would have been able to make something. You obviously learn a ton doing that, but it would have been some mess of a project, I'm sure, because I didn't know anything about sound design at the time. I wouldn't have known, I knew about editing and things like that, but like I wouldn't have known anything about sound design. I wouldn't have known anything about how to light this properly. So I think it was just more about like becoming a little bit more professionally aware of what goes into making a film, and then also you obviously learn a lot more. You learn a lot more about all the tools that go into it as well.
For sure. I think that the way that you kind of described the different levels of education with the
Hmm.
different levels of filmmaking that like really do go hand in hand. I remember the first film that we made that I had written knowing that like my intention is that we're going to enter this thing into film festivals. Being so green, like how green was I? I was so green that the first scene I can remember sitting next to my buddy who was our DP, as we all like had zero money and we were all wearing like 9 hats at the time.
Hmm.
He has this shot in a scene where our bad guy is scaring this girl. Girl is up against the wall of our headboard of her bed as this dude has come into her bedroom unannounced, and he's standing in the doorway. She's up against the wall, so wide shot. And they go for like 10 seconds, and I call cut. And everyone looks at me and they're like, "Why are you calling cut, Jimmy?" And I'm like, "Well, because I want, when you're watching the movie, I want a close up on him." And they're like, "Yeah, so you shoot the whole thing. We only have one camera. You shoot the scene with this, we'll shoot it again with that." And I'm like, "Oh shit. Yeah, what am I thinking?" And so like just stuff that like you may not even think about if you're on the outside,
Hmm.
uh to now it's like the short film that we had that just finished its festival run. We're getting ready to try to make a follow up to it, and I'm like got my pre-production binder,
Hmm.
like you're saying, the planning. So like
Hmm.
looking at me from like 12 years ago to now, like the wealth of knowledge of stuff just that that you have to do.
Hmm.
That is the true value of what film school was for me, on top of learning all the other technical aspects of crafting. So it
Hmm.
is interesting, and it's cool to hear you talk about that we're like, sounds like some of the stuff that it instilled in me instilled in you too, which it's cool.
Yeah.
The, but the film overall, man, again, Blackout, you guys, if you can find it, check it out. Blackout 2024, the werewolf movie, is available uh, right now. I'm pretty sure it's available like widely streaming, renting.
Hmm.
Yeah,
It's on most VOD platforms at this point. It had just had a run in New York and LA, and now it's on all the familiar VOD platforms.
so you guys can rent it or just pick it up. Right? I mean, I'm telling you right now, it's worth, when you get that buy or rent option. It's worth just spending extra money and having it in your library. Uh, but Colin, where can everybody kind of like keep track and keep tabs on what you maybe have working next on, man?
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, my website, colinbrazie.com. Check out work there. I'm on Instagram and Twitter, but I'm not super active. So you can follow me on Instagram. I'm pretty easy to find. Just search for me there. But yeah, no, but yeah, that's probably the best places just to find me that way. Hit me up. You can, you know, ask me questions, whatever.
Right on, man. When you come back to the world of horror, we will definitely see if we can get you back on the show to do another one of these, man.
Perfect. Perfect. Yeah, actually, I've got another uh, sort of indie sci-fi horror movie that's coming out. It's called Video Vision. I can plug that. It's premiering. It hasn't premiered yet. It's premiering at the Chattanooga Film Festival. It's opening that festival, which is in, I believe, June, middle toward the end of June. So excited about that one. It's a interesting sort of a midnight movie type of vibe. It's got definitely has some Cronenberg influences on it, which is he's one of my favorite filmmakers. I should have mentioned that earlier when you asked, "Oh, what sort of horror stuff do you love?" Love Cronenberg. He's one of my favorite directors. And so yeah, it's an interesting movie. I hope people enjoy it and check it out.
What's it called?
It's called Video Vision.
Video Vision. Okay, yeah, we will definitely have to keep our eye out for that one.
Yep.
But until then, man, thank you again, and we will see you on here again.
Yeah. No, thanks. Appreciate your time.